Okay, we're just hold on. Let's make sure we're okay. We are continuing the Rebbe's Maamar, um, LeDodi. We'll go a few minutes holding the which is, in order to explain the two ideas of the 13 attributes of mercy, which is in the month of El, i.e., Shagili to Elul, who, Kol Echad, Be'echad, that the revelation of Elul is to everyone. Even if you're extremely far, even if you're a person in the desert. At the same time, the revelation doesn't awaken the person, but it just is through Vurak Nasinas Koyach. It's only empowerment. Means the difference is that we said before that the 13 attributes of mercy of Yom Kippur is the Dodi Li, the Sirus Leila, that is a response or the Sirus Tata. Means our efforts, a Sirus Tata means an awakening from below. And God responds to what we do from our awakening from below, Kemaim upon him, like right. So like I just saw the middle Rebbe says it's exact. As much as you put in, you get back. After that, there could be a greater one, like we said. We explained last class that there's three levels of a Sarisa Delela. It's called the Nesinas Koyach, the empowerment for you to do, for a person to do. God responds to what we do in accordance. And then there's an abundance that comes separate. So this idea that El is 13 attributes of mercy, but at the same time, it's only a Nesinas Koyach. It means it comes from the Rebbe as an Nesinas Koyach. It comes from God as an empowerment, but we have to do. Maamar, the Rebbe explains that the Rebbe continues based on what the Friedrich Rebbe, I believe, was saying. Shagili, the Yud Gimel Midas Arachim Elum. Sorry, this is the Mamshech and the Maamar of the Kutei Torah, that the revelation of the 13 attributes of mercy in Elul. How is it different than the 13 attributes of Yom Kippur, which is God's response to our voda, which we do in Elul? So that he gives an example of Dugmas Melech Masada, the king in the field. Means from the king in the field, we see what does it mean? What's the definition of Nesinas Koyach, of an empowerment versus a response? Means God's response is like someone who empowers you to do something because He wants us to do, because it's important avodah. God wants to see our effort. That's the month of El, and then He responds what we do in accordance. So how do you kind of define this, what's called Nesinas Koyach, this empowerment, but it's not really a response. It's not a Hais Eirus, it's not an awakening fully. So the example is Melech Masada, king in the field. Why? The Rebbe explains that. And the Rebbe is totally breaking apart the Alter Rebbe's example and the Alter Rebbe's Maamar. Because the difference of how the king is in the field versus how the king is in his chambers is in two ways. A, the kind of revelation of the field versus the kind of revelation, the level of revelation in the palace. We're not going to really do any of the footnotes, but those should be learned actually. So those could learn on their own. The Rebbe says, "Ikra Gili Demelch B'Yafia." Where do you see the king in his royalty, the beauty of the king? Techazena Inechad. You should look at the king in his. It's a concept, right? It's a pasuk that says, "Melch B'Yafia Techazena Inechad." You should see the king in his beauty. Where does that really apply? Sees Ishaya is Behech Malchusi when he's in his palace. Then you see the king in his royalty. We're not talking about seeing the king. So to say personally, like you say, well, I had a unique experience with the king. That we're going to talk about that's Melech Masada. But if you want to see the king, what's defining the king? The king is because what makes the king special in a regular case of a king, not the Abishah, because the Abishah lowers himself to be defined as a king. But once you're in a king, if the definition of king is to be royal, that's where a king has to be. So we want to see where's the king in his full glory when the king is royal. When's the king royal? In his palace. When he's in his palace. When he's in the proper clothing, the garb, right? You see the King of England, the Queen of England, when they want to show a moment of royalty, they're in the full garb. There's the crown. When the king is in the field, he's casual king. Ala gili atzmai u'beikir k'shuvasada. So the revelation as far as the awe is greater in the palace. But the revelation of the essence of Atzmai, the person themselves, the interaction of what's inside all those clothing, like at the end of the day, garments are just garments, is in the field. Why? When the king is in his palace, like the Rebbe says, because then not everyone has access. Only those who go into it, those who have permission, A is permission, and B, even who gets permission is only the few. Nivchara means the ones who were chosen. Shiba'am. Yechidei Segula. So there's the chosen and the unique people. However, when the king is in the field, Rashaim, then it's permissible. Yecholim, and you can, the Friedrich Rebbe adds. Not just that it's possible, but you have an ability. The haklas part of komi anyone can. There's no such thing as in the field. There's no rules. That's one of the definitions of the field. Is by definition there's no rules. That's why it's Esav that can also be in the field because there's no rules, and the woman could be molested in the field, like we learn in next week's parsha Kisvei. She besada because in the sada there's no rules. It's not the system of the city, and therefore with that also b'kedusha there's no rules. Everyone can go meet the king. And not just that everyone has the sort of say the chutzpah, the gall to meet the king. The king's attitude is different. He receives everyone. The same for Param Yafis with a gracious face. He shows a radiant face. Again, like the Rebbe is going to explain that the difference between those two ideas are both how he feels about you. That's a panim. That's a panim shechakas. He's showing a face where he takes special joy in your being, in your essence, and that all this is about encouraging the person to approach the king. The Rebbe says that's an example. What's the parable to God? Avel. What are the revelations of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, which also have the 13 attributes of mercy? And concluded in that is the 10 days in Teshuvah between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. That's the king in the palace. And that kind of revelation, like the effect a king has, means if you want to be affected by the king, so to say, of the royalty of the position of king, that's going to be in the palace. We're going to be in awe, right? Casual king is that he's king. It's hard to be overwhelmed by that image. But the king, when all of a sudden you see the king in his royalty, and like it's brought down Chassidus, everyone's bowing to the king. You walk into a palace, and you're a small person. You see so many important people, ministers and princes and dukes and duchesses. Everyone's bowing to the king. That it's an overwhelming image, and so the effect of that image is great. That's why it says as far as Gilui goes, the Gilui of Melech, of Malchus, that's going to be in the palace. But you want Gilui of Atzmai, the king himself, the person, so to say, the being inside that's in the field. So Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, you have a Melech HaKodesh, right? You say, HaMelech, you have all the Melech. But that's what Gilui Rosh Hashanah and Kippurim is the Behechel, who by often Shagilim Oris Adam awakens the person. But Dugas Melech Behechali, the king is in his chambers, in his palace. Levushi Machas Bekesha Machas, in his royal clothing, in his crown. Shumatul Emo Pacha, the image and the experience is itself intimidating. But how could you be sensitive to that awesomeness? For you to really appreciate what does it mean, the awesomeness of the king, and not just say, okay, whatever, not just to be passive about it, but to really understand how awesome the royalty is of the king is because you're coming from Chodesh Elul. So here the Rebbe is saying it's not just that there are different types; they go hand in hand. That's the whole idea of Elul leads into Tishrei. So the Rebbe is going to explain the idea of Elul is that you become from the chosen. The chosen are not just important people. The chosen are people that understand what it means to be by a king. A king is not a tourist attraction. There's once a Rav here in Yerushalayim. Someone said, I want people to come see you. Why? Because he was a famous name. So he wanted to show off a famous name. So he goes, I'm not an animal in a zoo. It means he's here to talk to people, to teach people. He's a big scholar, Talmudist, a Hasidic insight, wrote many books. So, but to go and just to say that I met so and so, that's like going to the zoo. That's what he felt. The same thing I did. The idea is that you going to the palace is not like going to the zoo and understanding what it is to meet the king. You have to have Chodesh Elul, and then you become from the chosen few that understand what it means to meet the king. The way I'm teaching this Maamar, the way we're learning this Maamar together is we're going to jump ahead as opposed to piecing it together, because the issue with piecing it together is that you have to kind of really, because we're learning it slowly, you have to keep the flow. You have to remember what was said in order to apply that. So better just to kind of just throw everything as it comes and repack it as we see it inside. Like to hear the Rebbe says, that's how you become from the chosen few. It's not that the difference between Elul and Rosh Hashanah is that Elul is for everyone. And Rosh Hashanah is no matter what you could do, you can't go into Rosh Hashanah, because everyone could go to Rosh Hashanah. But how could you go into Rosh Hashanah as not to be a spectator, but as just a spectator, someone who's watching, not going to the zoo, but going into seeing the king and being mufcharim shabam from the chosen, is when you do Elul properly. Sha'am v'yachid segula, the unique people. They can go into the palace. If you properly do Elul, then you are one of those people going to the city with the king. The Hagili de Elul Shudugmas Melech Masad. This time we say that the revelations of Elul is king in the field. The Rebbe continues, that image of king in the field, because it's not overwhelming, it's on contrary, it's casual king. But that gives the person the strength, the koyach, to do what you have to do to become one of the chosen few. And there's no that level of revelations for everyone. Everyone could be inspired to see that here's the king, and I can listen. What the Rebbe is saying over here is an important point. The Rebbe is saying over here is, the question is, what's greater? We're not sure. I could say in some ways you say that Rosh Hashanah is just like this awesome image, but the essence of the Gili Atzmai, the actual revelation, is more in the field. It's more personal. But the truth is actually the very fact that the idea of Elul is to be from the chosen few means that really the high game is to be able to go to the palace, and to be able to go to the palace and not just to be a spectator, a person's watching, or a person is just standing that doesn't know what's going on, but to be properly from the Mifchar Shabbat, properly understand what does it mean a king, what does it mean a king in his royalty, what does it mean a king in his crown. To be that kind of person, that's really where it's at. God wants us to be able to be there. He doesn't want to only have a casual relationship with us, where it's beyond us to have a relationship with Him as He is King, because He is King. King is he's not an actor. Malchus is real, and God wants us to feel the Malchus. He becomes casual with us, so we should be able to become those who could understand what it means, the Melech. Right, the Rebbe of Kerliner says Hamelech. The Alter Rebbe writes in the Machzer, he faints. Malchus. So the idea is that you should become one of the people. Then, although you could say it's Geluim of Malchus. It's revelations of Malchus. So the Rebbe says, but that to become that special person, there's no easy pass. There's no money you could pay for it. You have to work on yourself. It comes with avodah. But everyone, there's no person who doesn't have the opportunity to do the avodah and to become from those chosen few. Like the kings of the field. When the king is in the field, he's casual. You're not fearful. That's not because there's an idea you're comfortable with the king because he allows himself to be comfortable with you. But the essence, the king is royal and is beyond you, right? The character of the king is not fake. But especially if you're a person who's in the field, not just that you meet him in the field, but you're a field person that needs that extra mesinas kach, and extra empowerment. You're on a low level. You're a person that the field is your place of comfort. When the king is in such a situation, The Rebbe says it's not, it's here, okay, this is a big point. The Rebbe says, when the king is so casual, it's so casual that it's availability that you have to make the decision. It is no kind of awesome thing when you get even a yearning to meet the king, because then it's not a koach, it's not your own avoda. That's why the Maamar says, "Call me writes it. You have to write, so you have to want. You have to want on your own. But it's the hakapinah. You have to go out and greet him. This is that they're going out to greet the king. You have to want to. He's not going to give you the want. The want you have to have. He's going to make himself available that you could want, but he's not going to create the want. But the empowerment to go greet him is because he's available, because he's in the field. Being in the field, you have the permission, the ability, the understanding who you are, to greet the king. Right, we're going to stop here. And Be'ezus Hashem, we'll continue next week. Hopefully next week we can finish the Maamar. Have a wonderful Shabbos Chodesh Tov.